Good morning, everyone. And this video is definitely in response to Fordman's question regarding, well, how do you actually ID plants? And he has purchased a Peterson's field guide. I'm not going to give you a fish, I'm going to teach you how to fish, so to speak, because I'm going to give you some resources to help you ID plants, and then some, basic examples of the pitfalls and how, if you're going to utilize something I'm going to tell you about, what details to look for. First of all, I have an employee, very promising, high school soccer and basketball star. And I said, Nash, I want you to identify this plant. And so kind of looked puzzled for a bit, and then he brought out his phone and took a picture of it and hit the Google feature that kind of identifies stuff because it compares photographs. And so proud. It's a butterfly weed. Okay. I didn't tell him that it was actually evening primrose. I'm going to keep quizzing him until he figures it out on his own. Phone apps are a useful resource, but you get what you pay for. There is the Google feature that compares photographs, which in this case was way off base. I mean, there are some striking similarities between butterfly weed structurally and evening primrose, but there are some glaring differences. If he had in fact had the app picture this, that's kind of accurate. I'm not going to say it's accurate to the degree of 100%, but it's a lot better than the Google one. So a phone app. Secondly, field guides, old school. Peterson's and Audubon's covers a huge area beyond your state, your region. And so you have to sort through tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff just to get to just the plants that might be in your environment. I would suggest having the Audubon and Peterson's because it's good to have multiple resources, but try to find a book like this, Michigan. And so it narrows it down to Michigan. A lot of these are naturalized, which means that they came from somewhere else, and they're considered Michigan wildflowers because they've been here a long time, like Herb Robert, or as in England they call it Stinking Bob. It's in the geranium family, and it's a little purple flower. It's kind of pretty. But in this case, you have to wait till it flowers. Now, this is not a game where suddenly tomorrow at any time of year you're going to have a mastery of flower IDs. You pick up one plant at a time. Be gentle with yourself. Learning process. But yeah, in the case of this, yellow flowers, how do you know unless it's blooming? Now, I'm hearing something. There's also the resource, the best resource I think, is having a human person that is knowledgeable. You can check with your local Audubon Society because many birders know a number of plants. And if you're on a list or what have you, you go to Audubon bird walks, you're going to be involved in tracking down birds in a variety of habitats, which is good because plants prefer certain habitats. I'm not going to look for, say, a wetland dark woods plant in my yard. And I'm not going to look for a yard plant in the deep dark woods. So it helps having a person. And again, I'm not going to tell you that all bird people know plants, but there is a good possibility. The next up is your county extension agent. If they're not completely busy, you could check and maybe say, could you come here and do an invasive plant walk and see if there's any problem plants here? And usually there's an invasive person connected with the county extension, but they may or may not have a lot of extra time on their hands, or even if they don't, they should be willing to look for invasive plants, and along the way, because they know they're invasive, they know they're regular plants. What else? Your local nature center, naturalists on duty. Your local garden club. There are a lot of master gardeners who are starting to take up planting native plants, and so that's a resource. Find a person, find a mentor. Next up is, as I say, I've forgotten more than I learned. And that's where taking notes, learning how to make reasonable botanical drawings, knowing the structures of the plants and what structure means, the stem, the leaves, arrangement of leaves, ad infinitum. And once you start cluing in on this, and this doesn't need to be your final version, you buy a notebook. A nice notebook. Make it proud. Get a leather-bound one. You know, this is your book on medicinal and food plants, edible plants. You are practicing your artwork, so you can... These are little cards that'll be on the ground near plants on the trail system. A botanical drawing. What features will allow me to identify this plant? And this is a learning aid too, along with a reference material for your area, because you're taking an inventory of your area. And then the Latin name, which helps. You can get by with the common names a lot of cases, but impress your friends and family by learning the Latin name, because that helps in grouping plants together. Genus and species. Genus might be the Smith family, and the species is little Timmy. You know, it's that whole thing. All cats are animals, but not all animals are cats. There's a thing called taxonomy. It's classification of life forms. In this case, it would be the kingdom Plantain. So you're taking notes, you're drawing, you're going to, for the next part, habitat, you know, terrestrial, freshwater, wetlands, blah, blah, blah. And let's pick out a cool one. Let's pick out a poisonous one. You're taking notes on this plant. Cypress spurge is considered to be unsafe, and when taken by the mouth, the plant can cause nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cancer, and a sudden interest in listening to Nickelback. It doesn't really say that. I thought I'd add that. Lavender. Lavender can treat mental disorders, including nervousness, depression, restlessness. Lavender can also be used to treat on and on. Now, when we developed this, we didn't just go to one resource and find the one that we liked. Wide variety of resources, and you pick out the commonalities in there. You weed out the crazy stuff. Lavender can grow hair on a billiard ball. See where I'm going with this. You have to have a wide net. The big thing is, if it says it cures dropsy, whatever dropsy is, like a lazy eye, I don't know. But typically, if it's poisonous, all references will say it's poisonous. Poisonous, do not use. You know, so don't just pick out the most flattering one. You figured out your plant, you know the scientific name, so you're not identifying things when you're figuring out what it's good for, the uses, what have you. Go to YouTube, there's so many. How to cook and prepare plantain, for example. Now the structure. This can be confusing. You don't have any flowers on it yet, so you don't know between this one and this one. Now I'm looking at the structure, and this should be in your pictures. It has, look at that. These definitely have a square stem. They have alternate leaves. It's not like a ladder, one here, then here, then here, then here on opposite sides. Alternate leaves. So it's in the mint family, Laminaceae. That doesn't really help me because there's 45,000 species in it. Now, square stem, and also on your drawings, the margins, the sawtooth. Are they bunches, little, every so often? Include details. I'm going to try it. That's rather pleasing. Clear my palate. Gives you wings. Of course, it doesn't have just one eye in there. It doesn't. Don't do a Peter Pan. It tastes remarkably the same. And if I was able to key out, I know alternate leaves, square stem, boom, cement. Tastes like Earl Grey tea. It's either Monarda festulosa or Monarda didyma, either wild bergamot or bee balm. In either case, the difference is the color of the flower. And there's a certain deepness and green in the plants here between the two. They both have the same medicinal and tasty uses. So, you know, whether it's wild bergamot or bee balm, either or. Found this in my yard. This is some kind of plantain. And this is where just raw memorization comes into play. It's not a dogwood, it has different veins. Growing in my yard, it doesn't turn into a tree. Just a plantain. I'm not scared of plantain. I could put that on a salad. But again, somebody taught me that, my mama. Next up, and this is where the flowering helps in the final form. That looks like for all intents and purposes, a dandelion. But it has this weird sap. I would wait until the flower appears, like a dandelion, like the Hulk dandelion, really tall plant, can be 6 feet tall, prickly leaves. This is one of two things. It's either Latuca virosa or it's Latuca canadensis. See how smart I am? Opium lettuce, prickly lettuce, it's a pain reliever. In any case, it doesn't taste good, but it's not going to poison me. Don't do this. If you think it's a dandelion-y looking plant, don't just eat it until you know exactly what it is. But I know it well enough to know that if I had a toothache, it would probably help with that, because that is a pain reliever. All in all, I think I've covered all my bases. And look at that, it's time to open the gate. It's important to have good references, because trust me, if you're walking through a sea of green and you're trying to use whatever field guide, you're just going to confuse yourself and maybe kill the whole interest in your heart to know your plants. That, adieu.